Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to The Shift and to today's panel and Q&A, Caring How You're Scaring, Crafting Scary Movies with Attention Paid to Mental Health. It's a super fun one. I'm Adrienne Finch. I am a digital creator and I've been working with The Shift for a while now. And today I'm here to just host this awesome conversation. So I want to give a great big welcome to our amazing panelists today, who I will be introducing soon. We've got Zachary Spiegel, Ariel Brown, Jasmine J. Johnson, and Colton Scrivener. And Colton is actually joining us in recorded spirit as a behavioral scientist and horror film producer. His October is very busy, as I'm sure you can believe, but he did share some thoughts in advance. So get excited for that. This is a panel and a Q&A, so we hope you have a lot to ask. And when you do have questions, just feel free to drop them in the chat. But right away, we'd love to get to know what industry you guys are joining us from, what city you're in. So let me know in the chat, where are you from? Are you a filmmaker? Are you a mental health professional, an educator, or perhaps just you love movies like me and scary movies specifically? We'd love to get to know who's here. So take a second if you would like, let us know. And obviously a huge shout out to also the mighty production team that's actually bringing this event together. So we have producer Nadia Sarmova and we have associate producer Lindsay Jimenez, who are making all of this happen in the background. So thank you guys. And for those of you who are joining The Shift for the first time, hello and welcome. The Shift produces mental health themed content and events, and we partner with filmmakers, creators, and organizations. For more information on how we do that exactly, we are dropping a PDF in the chat now, so you can check that out. And for everyone here today, we are also dropping panelist bios in the chat now, so you can get to know these filmmakers even more. I'll give each of them the chance to introduce themselves after we take a quick look at a few moments from their work. So let's take a look.
Hey, you reached Maya.
Maya. Next time I call you and you don't answer, I'm calling the police.
Why are people so fascinated by horror? Well, the learning that it can bring us.
And I think you don't only learn about the dangerous things, but you also learn about your own reactions to those dangerous things, right? Like you're learning about, if I'm watching a scary movie, let's say a true crime documentary or something, I'm learning about dangerous people, but I'm also learning about my own sort of responses to that and what it feels like to feel anxious. And so we're not very familiar with those feelings and we kind of push them away, which is not always bad, but it does mean that when they come up, they inevitably come up, right? We're not very good at dealing with them because we haven't experienced them and played with them and learned how to regulate those things. You have to experience bad emotions to learn how to regulate bad emotions.
Okay, wow. I literally got goosebumps from that first trailer. This is awesome. So, panelists, thank you so, so much for being here. And it's time for some introductions. So, if we could get your name, your title of your film, or the name of your film and your title, and as well as kind of a 90-second overview of your film, what role you took part in, that would be awesome. Let's share with the crowd. So, Ariel, let's start with you and then go to Zachary and Jasmine.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Brown. I play the lead actress in Inner Demons, Maya. This film it tackles issues such as depression, suicidal thoughts. So you really watch her throughout the film grapple with all of those topics, and it doesn't have much dialogue. So you really get to dive into the emotion of that film as she goes through this process of deciding to possibly end her life. And more intricacies in there as well. But yeah, that was my role in the film, and I really enjoyed creating it along with Jasmine. Yeah.
Awesome. Zachary, what about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Spiegel, and I'm an LA-based casting director. And I was the co-casting director on a horror independent short called The Sequence, along with my partner Nicole Doro on it. And this horror and psychological thriller, one could argue, is a disturbing whodunit. After dreaming of murdering her family and dying by suicide, a stay-at-home mom battles her darkest fears as her horrifying dream becomes a chilling reality. So there's a great comedy for you. And I just, before we move forward, I actually just wanted to thank Nadia, Mo, Lindsay, and everyone at The Shift for including casting in this panel. We don't always get this kind of visibility, and I just hope that it serves as a friendly reminder that casting and pre-production are just as vital to the creative process as the actual filmmaking. So thanks all.
I'm gonna yes and what he just said, and I would say it not almost as vital, but like it might even sometimes be a little bit more vital. Like your planning isn't your pre-planning. But I am Jasmine J. Johnson. I am the writer director of Inner Demons, and Ariel already gave you a little bit of an overview of the short, but it is a psychological thriller about a woman who is very depressed and has sort of reached the precipice of having to decide, does she want to continue fighting? Is life worth living for? Or is it time to throw in the towel? And we kind of catch her at just this moment where she decides, maybe I want to fight.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing. And thank you for coming together again to talk to us today about your efforts, your process, your takeaways as filmmakers who have created or been a part of the horror film industry. Scary movies definitely do a great job of really captivating audience members, and it really seems to keep people coming back. In 2023 alone, actually, 75 million tickets were sold, 46 films were released, and $798 million grossed domestically. So it's safe to say that horror is definitely a booming industry. And I'm so curious. I was actually talking with a friend the other day about this, just what draws us to scary movies and why do so many of us enjoy the thrill of fear? So we're actually going to first hear from behavioral scientist Colton Scrivener, who is joining us remotely.
I'm Colton Scrivener, and I'm a behavioral scientist at the Recreational Fear Lab at Aarhus University and in the Department of Psychology at Arizona State University. And I study the psychology behind morbid curiosity and why people are interested in things that sometimes scare them and how that can, in some cases, even be good for them. The first study that I really took a leap on, I guess, was I looked at why people sometimes enjoyed violence. So the traditional explanation for why people like horror films was just that, well, some people like adrenaline rushes, right? And that's when I started researching this topic, I found that really narrow and didn't seem to be true for a lot of people. There were a lot of people who didn't necessarily like the adrenaline rush, or they seemed to like other aspects of horror movies. And so from research that I've done, it seems that there are at least 2 or 3 different reasons that people like horror movies, depending on who you are. So there are some people who like horror movies just for the adrenaline rush, right? They like them for the same reason that they would like skydiving or bungee jumping or any other kind of high adrenaline activity. But that's actually just a subset of horror fans. So there's a whole other subset of horror fans that don't necessarily like the adrenaline so much, but they do enjoy the feeling of overcoming their fears. They like that they feel afraid because it gives them, a horror movie gives them the opportunity to actually overcome that fear and gives them kind of almost like a confidence boost in their ability to do that. And then the third sort of group of people that haven't been researched so much, but in my research, we've called them the dark copers. So they use sort of dark fictions to help them work through difficult emotions. And so if they're feeling anxious or depressed or dealing with something difficult in their life, scary fictions that they can kind of control and that they can feel afraid but still and feel anxious but still come out feeling okay at the end, that helps them actually work through those feelings that they're feeling in the real world.
Wow, I love hearing that explained so clearly. And I was trying to think about which subset I fall into, and I feel like probably overcoming my fears. My thought is like, if I can sit through a horror movie, then I could hopefully sit through my real life. And I would love to know what everyone else feels about that. Which category do you fall into? Let us know in the chat. And now, focusing specifically on the filmmaking, several Hollywood creatives have openly shared that, the psychological effects that they have faced while working on horror films, from Florence Pugh in Midsummer to Jennifer Carpenter in The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and Gareth Evans in Apostle, and Vera Farmiga in The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, just to name a few. So my question to the panelists is, what mental or emotional impact has working on horror films had on you or on your fellow creatives? And have you, for example, experienced or observed instances of emotional burnout or distress among cast or crew members during the filmmaking process? So I'd love to know what that's like. Jasmine, why don't we start with you?
I would say for me personally, making horror movies has been just like a really cathartic release. It's sort of a way to process and work through. I tend to be a filmmaker that operates from a very personal place, and so it is a way to work through. I guess what was the third one? The coping. It's the coping for me. As far as when it comes to bringing those things on screen, and I am a writer director, but before this I was a producer and I happened to work in the horror genre for about 6 years. I think it really depends on the person, sort of the effect of what you're making. And it not just depends on the person, but it also depends on what you're making. I think that there are shades to horror. There's some horror that I think is meant to be like popcorn fun, and that has its place in the genre as well. But then there's other horror, as we've watched, that is incredibly intense. If you think of something like Hereditary, which feels so visceral and so real and so based in human emotions, the dark side of humanity and human emotions. That's where it gets a little bit harder. That's where it gets tricky. But again, it really depends on the person. It depends on your actors. It depends on your crew, and it depends on your subject matter. I think personally, what I have experienced is that if you have conversations around certain things and you try to, again, to talk about pre-production and pre-planning, sort of understand what certain people's triggers are and make sure that they understand what they're getting into. You would be surprised how many people do not read a script, which blows my mind. But make sure we all understand not just what we're getting into, but like how things are going to be filmed and just like how far we're going to go with certain subject matters. You can sort of mitigate a little bit of that, but inevitably you might run into a scenario where there is a person who has gone through an experience and it just is hitting a little bit close to home. And again, in your pre-planning, you have to sort of talk through and understand how you're going to address that if it happens to happen. I would say on a whole, for me personally, I haven't had anyone have a full shutdown, but it's definitely like it can be intense for certain people, even on Inner Demons, where it was the short, and we shot for over 2 days. There was a scene in particular, which is like the last scene in the short, that I happened to. This is the only time I was out with like just the general crew watching from monitor, and they were like, "Whoa, this is really intense." And like I had people come up to me and be like, "Whoa, like I'm feeling kind of some way about what we just shot," in a good way, like feeling emotionally stirred, but not wanting to show folks, but just coming to me to tell me that that was kind of impactful and that they were really excited to see what the short turned into. So yeah, it depends on the person, depends on the project.
Awesome. No, that's a great perspective, and we will, talk more about the pre-planning in a bit as well. I love that. Ariel, as the actress, what about you? What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, from my side of things, whenever I do a project or step into a project and I'm on set and the director calls action, that moment for me becomes real. So forever, how long I'm in that moment, it becomes real. And as an actress on this specific film, I'm having to deal with, the situation of Maya's depression and Maya's suicidal thoughts, but stepping into that as real and pulling from my own emotional, some my own experiences too, to bring that character into that reality to life. And so as an actor, you have to step back into those feelings but you also have to, once it's done, you have to know how to turn it off too and say, okay, I'm done accessing this emotion, and I'm done I'm playing in this world. Now I have to come back to my world, my reality, Ariel's reality, not Maya's. And so when you it's such a, it can be such a fine line, which is why these actors that you mentioned previously have expressed that they've had mental struggles after leaving a role, because you can spend anywhere from a short day, which could be 8 hours, to 15 hours on set in this role, in this world that you're creating along with your fellow castmates and crew members, that becomes real. And so it can have an impact. So you have to have methods in place to shut down the day, I guess, and kind of pull back and say, okay, I need to do this for this amount of time, but then I need to have this breathing technique or this decompression, a song, or whatever the case may be, case by case. So I know working on Inner Demons, it was so interesting how that project even came to me. She had seen me on another project and wanted to call me in for this job, but it was like after a time in my own life that I had just gotten out of like a depression myself. So it was very like interesting that, art was imitating life now. Like I was able to kind of, in a cathartic way, live that out too. I had already overcome it in my own life, but now I'm getting to portray it on screen. And so it was like me going back in and really feeling those feelings that Maya was feeling too. So it was a whole play coming into like, like a full circle moment, really. So yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure.
Did you know, just off that real quick, did you know when you kind of saw the script and you were in talks that it would be cathartic, or were you at all worried because of what you had just overcome and gone through that now you're activating this again?
I wasn't worried at all. I was actually like, I was in a moment of just like, wow, like this, that's how you just know when things are aligned, and something is for you. Like this was a role I didn't even have to audition for. She offered it to me. And so it was just meant to be.
I love
So I went into it head first. I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, and let's get it all out here on screen. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. And Zachary, from the casting perspective, how much of that do you have to think about ahead of time? Is that a part of it at all? What's your take on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly endorse everything the two of them have said so far. I've just been nodding in the background. Um, from a casting perspective, it definitely gets emotionally taxing for us when we're seeing the actors read the same sides over and over again as they pertain to blood, vomit, things like that, that we ultimately will need to see in order to make a decision, because the sides that we have chosen for actors need to represent some sort of character or emotional arc in order for us and our team to make the best decision possible. And so it's sort of this double-edged sword where we know that we don't want to put people through that, but at the same time, it's something that we need to see. And therefore, we need to make sure that everybody knows what it is that they are signing up for in advance. And this will sort of bleed into a future question, but a lot of that does have to do with communication from the get-go as well. And as Jasmine already pointed out, it always starts with the script. Always. And so the script is your Bible during any sort of process, especially at the beginning. And so if one is feeling mental or emotional burden or stress while reading that script, it's okay if this project under the umbrella of horror isn't for you right now. And I think that's something that I also want to say is not every genre is for everyone. I think that's what makes our industry so beautiful is we have a bunch of different folks catering to different audiences. And we could put that on a grander scale in terms of studios and networks, right? We have specific demographics who are tuning in to those specific things. And I don't think horror is any different. And I think it's okay to not audition for it. I think it's okay to not work on it. I think it's okay to always say no for your mental health and well-being. And if that means saying no to horror, you're saving me time too, because that means I'm that much closer to finding the best actor for the role. So that's my answer to that question.
That's great, you guys. Such good answers there, and so many different perspectives. I love that we're coming at this from all angles. So thank you. And when it comes to the viewers, so I want to talk about, how do horror films impact the viewers? So we're going to hear from Colton again and his research as the leading expert on the psychology of horror and true crime and morbid curiosity, something I know I really want to know about. So Colton.
So there's no evidence that horror films have any kind of long-term effects, or at least long-term negative effects on viewers. You might, what you hear is that if somebody is particularly anxious, sometimes they may see an increase in like nightmares or anxiety for the moments after they watch it, or sometimes even the day after they watch it. But those are very ephemeral feelings or ephemeral states, and there's no long-term harm or effects of watching horror movies. Rather than there being negative side effects of horror films, there actually is more evidence that there are some positive benefits to viewers. So some of these come in the moment. If you're feeling anxious, you can turn a horror movie, and in some people, in some cases, it actually allows them kind of an off-ramp for a cycle of anxiety. So if you're kind of ruminating and in this vicious cycle of rumination, sometimes a horror movie presents a very safe threat for your mind to latch onto that allows you to kind of get out of that cycle of rumination. And then there's some evidence from studies that I've done and that others have done that engaging in what we call scary play, so engaging in somewhat scary activities from a safe point of view is actually beneficial to your anxiety in the long run. It can help you build resilience to stressful situations and help you practice emotion regulation skills for dealing with feelings like fear and anxiety.
Wow. Okay, so what you're saying basically is that research is showing that there are actually more benefits than harmful effects for viewers of horror films. I never would have guessed that, honestly, but I mean, now maybe I can convince my friends to watch more horror movies with me, because they won't, but I'll tell them that it's perfect for anti-anxiety. So that's cool. And while viewers may experience these benefits, and I know actually a couple of you also said it was kind of cathartic, it's clear that creators still can face psychological challenges. So this leads me to the next question. And we talked a little bit about the pre-planning. Are there effective development or production practices, such as strategic planning or scheduling, structured breaks, or even intentional set design, that you guys have found particularly helpful to like reduce that emotional strain, especially on horror sets? And what have you seen or implemented yourself that has helped to counter or prevent any of the negative effects? Zachary, let's actually start with you for this one.
As I was saying before, it is about emotionally preparing the actors as well as crew through communication. And from a casting perspective, I've already touched on the script aspects of it, but we also need to talk about breakdown language as a result of that script as well. And so when we're putting together breakdown language, which is essentially the job description for what it is that we're looking for, I think that is a really, really great place to put any sort of content or trigger warnings having to do with what the nature of the project offers. So I can say that for us, when it came to the sequence, we had a big statement at the top that said, due to the nature of the project, please only submit talent who are comfortable with the horror genre. We said that right off the bat. Now, when it came to seeking specific roles, one of the challenges that we had, which is something that I was speaking with Nadia about and found interesting during our process, is we had to cast a minor. We had to find someone who was playing the age of 7 to 9. And as we all know, when we are that age, we do not have our frontal lobes developed yet. And so what ends up happening is not just per SAG-AFTRA rules and not just per California laws, but we also need to include their guardian in that conversation as well, and making sure that they've read the script. And yet, even then, what I will say is you can fully brief and prepare someone of that age as much as possible. But then once you are on set and you are seeing the things as a developing person for the first time, the experience will still be different. So I can put in my breakdown, which we did, language that is the following. Character is involved in a death scene, which has the actress vomiting after being poisoned. Parent or guardian must be allowed within sight and sound of the minor at all times while they are working. Monitor, onset tutor, studio teacher will be provided, right? And that was something that we made sure to highlight from the get-go. Again, doesn't mean that everybody who is submitting for the role is going to read it, right? And so for us, especially when it came to hiring young talent, it becomes about repetition, not just for them, but also for their guardian. And you best believe that when it did come to that final callback, we did make sure that they read the script. We made sure that they were comfortable with it. And then, of course, when it came to actually being on set, and it just so happened that I was visiting set that day when they shot the big scene with the blood and the vomit, that our producers, who were amazing, I cannot speak highly enough of Joe Bandelli and Brian Lappercino. I love them so much. And Joe is an amazing director who is not just well-versed in the horror genre, but understands the nuances of what it means to handle things delicately right before the cameras start rolling. And he was just amazing with that through and through. Now, does that bring up the question that maybe some sort of intimacy coordinator or mental health consultant can be doing that with the actor instead of the director? That, I think, is something that is worthy of discussion for sure. But to go back to the original question, I think that at the end of the day, whether adult or young talent, making sure that everybody is briefed on set for what is about to happen is extremely helpful. And that whatever these particular stories are, because so often in horror, they do act as metaphors for the horrors and the demons that we are experiencing mentally and psychologically, making sure that those things are addressed and prepared as much as possible and repeated.
Thank you so much for that perspective. Ariel, let's go to you.
Well, I'll just start at the beginning of kind of my process. Like they were saying, it starts with the script. But I started with the script by myself, and I kind of worked through it. Like I mentioned, there wasn't a lot of dialogue. So I went through the stage directions and anything she wrote down, and kind of went through that with myself first to see if anything, what emotions for myself were coming up that I could use or even needed to work through on my own before I got to set. So that was a very diligent process. And then even before we got to set, after I did that, Jasmine had a one-on-one meeting, and we broke the script down together. So that was like part two of really diving into, okay, what is this character feeling? What are the themes here, the emotional things that are going on? So we took time to really dive through it and kind of uncover those things even before we got to set. So I had my process, and then me and Jasmine had a meeting as well, and to talk about whatever I needed to talk about, whatever I might have had questions about the script or concerns with too before we got to set. And then once we were on set, I had my own space, and I was given kind of like my own area, especially if I needed to prepare before a scene. It was somewhere I could go to listen to my music, or to just be quiet before, going into the heavy scenes. Most of the scenes were heavy. There were no light scenes in that movie. And so I would have my separate space to do that. And then I would go on set, and the set was very quiet. So when I would be working, or even before action was called, because obviously it's going to be quiet when action is called. Even before that, it would be quiet, and I would have conversations with Jasmine about how I was feeling about this particular scene, how she wanted it to be portrayed, and so it was space to do what she wanted to be seen, but there was also space for me to say, hey, I feel like my instincts are telling me to do this, and she let me play that out as well. And so it was like I had the opportunity to play there, really, within those emotions and those things that I had grappled with in real life. And so it was very sensitive. Like this topic was approached, and shooting it was approached with a very sensitive hand all the way throughout that process. And then on the flip side, we were working in a very small environment. We were in a house, and it was a small, very small cast, 3 people, and small crew too. So you have all this heavy stuff going on inside the room, but outside, I was allowed to, like, see the process of it too. I had the woman who was playing my monster. There was a room where I could go see them making a mold of my face, a mask of my face, and I was able to like hold it and take pictures with it. So it was like there were some lighthearted elements like implemented too with this heavy script. But I was able to do that and see that process. And of course, communication was always open between everyone on the set. So it made for, like, there was, yes, it was a heavy subject matter, but there was the opportunity to step away from it and see the fun and the magic too of making a film. So it was equal. I think it was a very well balanced set and thought out process of how do we tackle this heavy subject matter, but how do we not leave a lasting effect on our cast and our crew at the same time. So it was very well done. And I can say that from experience of being on many sets. It's not always done like that. Sometimes you get thrown into a project and it's just like, okay, go. This is how I feel about it, blah, 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 go. It's not, you're just like, all right, well, I'm just gonna make it up. So I really enjoyed the step by step process that I not only implemented, but then Jasmine and the rest of the crew did while we were on set shooting. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And Jasmine, it sounds like you really did a great job with that. Well done. And do you have anything to add about kind of what your perspective was and when you were thinking about implementing those things, kind of what the thought process was behind that?
Yeah, I think everything that Ariel said was like really insightful, and I'm loving hearing your perspective, Ariel, as like an actress. I didn't even think to say, like, if you had talked to me first, I wouldn't have said this, but the atmosphere on set is actually, when you're making a horror movie, is very important. And I think that remembering, especially when you're working with really challenging material, that it's important to be sensitive, but you also are making a movie and you want to keep everybody in that mindset, particularly like your cast, because it can get heavy. And I love when people like want to be a part of the process and are able to come out and talk and like be it and explore and sort of be able to journey around and see things outside of just like what they're working on, because I do think that that's a little bit of a helpful tool to be able to step out of like that darker mindset. And just a reminder to everybody on the crew, like, what we're here to have fun and have a good time, but we are making something that is sensitive. So let's treat that sensitively and remember what we're asking people to do, because there's only one of us here who has to actually portray the character who is struggling with depression. So let's try not to be like horsing around or having to like joking around too much or all that, but like, I want you to still have fun, because I want everybody to be having a good time while they're making a project with me. But yeah, I think that I'm gonna just like go backwards from production since I started there, but you're gonna have levels of time. They always say you don't have enough time, you don't have enough money, but especially making a short, you don't have any time. You have zero time. In fact, we were behind when we first got started, but that's not the fault of like your crew. It's not the fault of your actors. And so even when you have to go fast, you want to try and keep like checking in like, hey, are you good? That was pretty intense. And also just like reminding particularly the actors, but also your crew, that what they are doing is working. Because I can't imagine being an actor and doing something that is so just like heart-wrenching and heartfelt, and then everyone being like, all right, okay, let's go. And you're like, was that okay? You know, so just making sure to be like, that was amazing, that was fantastic, do you want to go again, do you want to do it? And like letting everybody else know that if you like something that they did, please go tell them that you liked like this or that or whatever it is. Again, part of like having everybody sort of be connected with everybody in that sense. But it can be quick, but a check-in and communication, I think, is sort of key. And yeah, seeing what I personally love when not just actors, but when everyone feels the freedom to come to you and say like, hey, I understand what you're doing here. Have you thought about X? Have you thought about Y? So especially with actors, I would say like 60% of the time, when it comes time to be like, hey, is there something that I haven't thought of that you want to do? That's the thing that ends up in the short. And then I get frustrated again with the lack of time, because I'm like, man, if I had more time, I do more of that. So that's a really fun process. And then to keep going backwards, when you're in pre-production, as Zach, sorry, Zach, I think we're all friends now, so I'm just gonna call you Zach. Um, we have conversations. And the conversations start very early. They start with casting. They start when you're having your meetings with your heads of departments, like talking about things. And this is before you've hired like your head. You can sort of talk through their background, what they're like, and if you're working with sensitive material like we were, just like, you know, do they feel comfortable? Do they want to talk about what they felt when they read the script? Are they bringing anything from their own past or somebody that they know into the project? And that can sort of help you figure out if the project is something for somebody on both sides of the coin. Is this something that they might be able to deal with if they're having trouble articulating or even having a conversation with you about it? And then, of course, as a director, sort of figuring out, do I feel like the two of us are going to have synergy to tackle both the creative and the emotional side of making sensitive material? And then in casting, it was a little bit of a different process for this. But again, I said I was a producer beforehand and have cast a lot of horror shorts and a lot of horror projects, and making sure that people know what they're getting into, and sometimes actively selecting some of these more harder hitting scenes for an audition, so that when someone reads their sides, it's like, if this is your side, like, you got to know that like you're coming into a doozy. So let's talk about that. But I have had on set a couple of times where we had child actors who were like totally fine, and we talked about it beforehand. Let's take you to the hair and makeup trailer so you can see that, you know, this is just a guy in a suit or a gal in a suit, and you have the conversations, and then you walk the person on set, and the kid's like, absolutely not, get me out of here. And when something like that happens, I think it's really important, again, to go back to what kind of environment you're creating on set. You never, ever make anyone feel any kind of bad if they have any sort of reaction to what you're making. And you always make people feel like, even if you don't have the time, even if you're like, man, this kid not being able to act with this monster is going to set us back an hour. And now that means I have to go, I'm talking as a producer, but also as a director. Now that means I have to talk to my director, or as a director, I have to cut 3 shots from every scene we shoot moving forward. Never should the actor feel that way. It's always like, take as much time as you need. What can we do? Guy takes off his head. Maybe that means now makeup has to spend more time putting that back on him and getting everything sort of back together. But it's just really important that no one feels like their emotional state or the way that they're reacting to material is making anyone feel upset, angry, uncomfortable, costing people money, making people frustrated. It has to be like a safe space. And yeah, that's kind of like that. The atmosphere that you're fostering starts from the very beginning of the conversations that you're having.
No, that makes so much sense. And I'm honestly so impressed with all of you, because I think about how chaotic film sets already are. And then to add this element that is so sensitive and that you have to pay so much mind to. Well done, you guys. And we also actually heard from Colton on this one. So let's see what Colton has to say.
It can definitely be, you know, frightening not just to watch a horror movie, but actually act in one. I mean, if you're trying to embody a victim, you know, in a scene, I imagine it's even more terrifying than when you're watching it, the final product be done, right? And for some people, it can definitely be helpful to have time to decompress or have time to sort of sort through what had happened to sort of come back to reality from that fictional world, right? The interesting thing that I found in my research is the fact that some people don't like horror for the adrenaline, because I think that was the prevailing scientific explanation for so long, that the public also had this perception that, you know, people like horror movies, they like adrenaline, and it just seems to be the case that's not the case for a huge portion of horror fans. So I think that, and the fact that on average horror fans actually have slightly higher levels of baseline anxiety, so their trait anxiety, their sort of natural resting state of anxiety, if you will, is actually slightly higher than people who don't like horror movies. And that's kind of counterintuitive if you think that people only like horror movies because they can withstand the fear. But actually, it's people who sometimes are a little anxious who like horror movies because it gives them the ability to approach those feelings and regulate them and learn how to deal with them.
That's really fascinating to me, honestly. Just that horror fans can really use scary movies as a kind of therapy and really learn to face their fears head on through that. And I want to circle back for a second when we are talking about you, the creators. What role, I know we mentioned for a second, Zachary, you mentioned intimacy coordinators. What role do intimacy coordinators or mental health consultants play in a horror production? And how can they specifically support the psychological well-being of cast and crew? Ariel, why don't we start with you?
I don't know if I've ever been on a set that has had a mental health coordinator before, but if I had, I think it would open up just a line of communication, because especially if you are working on a project for a long time too, you might have residual effects such as dreams. I think that was mentioned here, such as dreams, and you might not want to just come to say like, "Hey, I had a dream about my character," but if you had a coordinator who could be asking you these types of questions, like, "Hey, have you had any X, Y, and Z?" And you can be like, "Oh, wow, actually I have." Now I can discuss it. It gives room to discuss things that aren't usually talked about on set. It's kind of, because when, like Jasmine said, you're moving on set. Like, there's a schedule, and there's not a lot of time to dive into what you're necessarily feeling aside from this scene. And so that coordinator could come in and help you dive into when you leave that set, or when you're starting your day, like, okay, is there anything that you want to talk about that has nothing to do with your scenes today? You know, and it just gives room for that actor to feel like they can express that, even because they might not even know that they need to express that. Like I said, it's not a usual thing to have a mental health coordinator on set, so it can become a part of a normalized activity for actors to be like, oh, I have this resource I can go to on set, off set, or I don't know how the coordinator schedule would work, but it's another resource to use that can help in their process. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jasmine.
Yeah, second to what Ariel said, I've worked with intimacy coordinators. I have not had any sort of mental health professional on a set that I've worked on, but I think that I have heard from other producer friends. And I would see why you would want this, but a lot of times if you're dealing with something that is very much so based in true life, like take, for example, true crime, but it doesn't even have to be true crime. Like sometimes you can be telling a story that is more of a drama, but is horrific in a different way. Like maybe there's events that you're portraying that will be triggering to the actors. Particularly because it is like based in something that was reality and was really happening. That's when I've heard from like some of my colleagues that it becomes a huge conversation and really helpful to have somebody on set to help people process those emotions. Again, to talk about conversation, communication beforehand. If it feels like in just the dealings that you've had with your cast and your crew, that it might be worth it to have somebody on set, and everybody's working and navigating different kinds of budget levels, well, then you should have somebody on set for that. But in my experience, having worked in horror, and I've been doing a lot of more fantastical is kind of the wrong word, but like not anything that was based off of a tangible event. Certainly things like if I'm writing it that were based off of experiences I've had. I think that the separation there, as long as we've given people the time and the place to process or to take a moment if they need it or anything like that, has seemed to be okay. But I know that if I was doing something that was really, really, I think maybe particularly heavy or harrowing, or about something that was based in a real event, especially if you have an actor who is playing a real character who went through something really intense, I think that it becomes important to have that conversation. Also, I've heard that when you're doing reality in some ways, if you are putting people through an experience that is going to trigger some of those same sort of fight or flight or like adrenaline inducing experiences that being in like your own little horror movie would be, and whether it's like a competition reality show or like a prank show or whatever that is, that they do have very long conversations, and they will have mental health professionals there to help people process what they went through. Those people are not actors. The scenario is fake though, but it's hard sometimes to separate those two things, even though it's not a real event, to separate that when you experienced it in real life. A little bit similarly to how I think some actors who portray real individuals have a hard time separating that when it steps off set. So yeah, that's where I've heard like the mental health professional being on set being really, really, really useful.
That's a great point that I didn't think about, is reality shows like that. That makes total sense that people would need that kind of support. Zachary, I would love your take on this, as well as kind of when we're forward thinking and looking at how can the horror film industry evolve to be even more trauma aware and inclusive in both content and production process. What are your thoughts on kind of that?
So I've thought about this a lot, and the first thing that I thought of was when flight attendants brief you on safety measures every time you get on a plane. And even though it's something that we see and hear over and over again, to the point where it's the last thing that we probably want to listen to or look at when we get on a plane because we're tired, or we'd rather watch the movie that we downloaded onto our laptops and pay no attention to what that is. The intention, obviously, is to keep people safe. That is the intention, right? And so ideally, when bringing on a mental health consultant, I would love for all of them to not only have the capacity to break down exactly what is going to happen for anything that might be disturbing and or triggering for cast and crew, but to sort of have a universal language like we do on an airplane, like put on your oxygen mask before you put on somebody else's, right? To sort of have a universal language and vocabulary for saying, hey, this is our script and this is what is about to happen to actors before the scene starts rolling. Because very often, even though it's something you may have rehearsed, even though it's something you may have read, to hear it happening from somebody else, from a non-biased opinion, by the way, right? We already know that your director's going to want you to do well. We already know that your crew's going to want you to do well. But somebody who doesn't know you as well, someone who's a little bit more of a stranger, saying these things to you right before they happen in a way that is structured and routine, I think is actually going to go a long way.
I love that idea. I really do. You're right about the routines. And I love the example of the flight attendant, kind of just having almost like a checklist, a mental health kind of check-in or checklist or thing that gets said. I love that idea. Do either of you two have any thoughts on that question? Kind of just the looking forward, how you would maybe want to change things in this space, or what people can do to be more aware and more sensitive to this? we'll keep it at about a 60-second each time limit because we're getting close and we have a few questions as part of the Q&A. But do either of you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that having conversations with professionals, even if you don't have the budget to have somebody on set, actually would be very impactful. Even if it's just like as a reminder for maybe some of the crew who are in their world and thinking about sort of more the technicality and the mechanics of things, that like, we remember we are shooting something that has heavy subject matter. And here are some things like, please don't say this when you're just like colloquially talking to somebody. Please don't do that. This might be something that somebody who is portraying this has to go through, or so things like that I think would be helpful, because on a whole, the conversation does start from the top. If the person at the top cares about having these conversations and making sure that everybody has the right language for that, well, then it will trickle down to the bottom. But I do think that that's important and probably a good idea that more people should be implementing.
Ariel, anything to add?
Yeah, like Jasmine said, it starts at the beginning and at the top, because you, as an actor walking into a set, there's so many things that go on before you even get there, and you could walk into anything. So if that conversation is already being had, and you know you're walking into a safe space, a safe environment, and it is immediate and apparent when that has taken place or when it has not, we can tell. Like we can tell. And so it's like, am I on this set? Am I going to have to fend for myself and kind of do my own process? Or am I going to be supported and feel like I can come to people to talk to them, or have resources to deal with anything that might come up? That has to be already in place before I get there. I don't set the standard for that. So that has to be going. And it makes for such a more a beautiful environment to work in, an easier environment to work in. Yeah, safer, like I said, environment. So, but it has to be implemented within the planning process of how we're going to tackle these things. Because when they come up, if there's no plan previously that has been coordinated, it's just either it's just going to get swept under the table, or someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get hurt, or not have, something's going to happen, and there's no way to deal with it, so it has to be there before I get there, or the chips fall where they may. Pretty much.
Yes. Such great answers, you guys. Seriously, thank you. And now we're actually going to go to some of the questions from the audience. So actually, Ariel, back to you again. Someone wants to know, what advice would you give to actors on preparing emotionally for intense projects?
Yeah, like I said, I take that time by myself first. I have to go through the script by myself. If there's anything triggering for me, I'll take that mental time to kind of dive into what's actually being triggered for me, if I can use it, if it's something that I need to work through before I get on set. Is this going to hinder me? Is this a blockage? I take that personal time. And then while I'm on the project, after I leave set too, I think I talked about what I do on set, but after I leave set, if I need to, I love journaling. I love sitting outside and being in nature to decompress. Those are some processes that I use to kind of bring me back to self. I take that time in the morning. So if I need to, any of those processes can be helpful to get out of that, a negative emotional state that a project might have caused or anything. So I really take that time with myself to be like, hey, is this emotion that I'm feeling really mine? Or is this something I brought home with me from this project that I did? And I'm very just like, I pay attention to how I'm feeling on a day-to-day basis anyway. So yeah, breathing, music helps, journaling, getting outside, and just
Yes, getting outside. Definitely.
Mhm.
And then someone wants to know about sequels. This is actually a great question. So, what about sequels when people and actors have to kind of keep going in and out of these dark places and moods, maybe with time, lots of time in between? Jasmine, I would like to know from you, how would you handle this, like sequels and things like that, to allow actors time to kind of decompress from those experiences, or what how do you think of those types of things?
You know what? The nature of this business is the actor will have time to decompress between a project and a sequel, because it takes time to get something made again, to have the public come out and be like, oh, we love this, and then get the tools together to have another project. I think that the little asterisk I would put to that is like, how do you get people back into the headspace that they were in before, or in adjacent headspace if your sequel is not exactly like a direct one-to-one, this happened exactly afterwards? How are you getting people back into that headspace? But not just that, how are you thinking about what went down on the first iteration of the project you were working on, and trying to implement things that you can do to make things run smoother the second time around? And that really depends on, I think, the specific project and obviously the specificities of whatever happened on your project. But I think being able to have a sit down or a postmortem, which I think is a nice word since we're talking about horror, but a postmortem about what happened with the project. And those can be sometimes painful as any sort of leadership position, to have to sit down and be like, all right, I only want to talk about the things that I did good, but in reality, we should probably talk about like some of the struggles that we had along the way, and making sure that you do that after the project, the first project that you've done, so it's fresh in your mind. Take notes, put it somewhere so that you remember, so that if you are lucky enough to have a sequel to something that you've done, you can refer back to that, and you can take that moving forward and implement new plans, so that you're not coming up on the same issues that maybe you might have had, or your cast felt like they had, or your crew, or all of the above, when you're going into the next project. It should be smoother sailings in theory.
No, totally. And you bring up a point that I wouldn't have thought of, which almost is the opposite of like, instead of just how do they decompress, how can they actually come back to that same space? So that's really interesting. And then finally, we've got a question for Zachary. When casting for horror films, given the emotional intensity and psychological demands of the genre, do you look for any qualities or characteristics in actors, or is it kind of just what you said, you're briefing, and if people are right for the role and they know what they're getting into, then we're good? Or do you look for anything specific in terms of your actors?
I do. My answer to this is going to be twofold. And the first part of my answer is going to be commitment. You'd be surprised how many people think that they are diving headfirst into the genre, and they're not. So I would say, whatever character you're taking on in a horror genre, don't be afraid to go there. Even if you think it might be a little much, right? And we live in this self-tape world now, so maybe try something that's a little bit more subtle, and maybe something that pushes the envelope a little bit, and see what happens when you watch both. Is this going to be something that might be a take that a lot of other people might send, or is this other take something a little bit more risk-taking? And my answer to you will always be, send the one that is a little bit more risk-taking, if not a lot more. And then my second part of my answer for you is going to be, and I find this more so in horror than any other genre, is an actor's relationship with their environment. Because when you read a script, very often you will see what the environment is, whether it is the baby crying, the clock ticking, whatever it is, and what is actually going to instill fear in your viewers is watching the actor respond to their environment, whether they have lines or not. And so for me, it is super important that when you are putting together an audition, you are understanding not just what it is that you are saying, but your relationship to your environment surrounding you. And you'll be so surprised as to how many tapes I watch or how many Zoom callbacks I facilitate where the actors, for the most part, are so wonderful at their relationship with their reader and with their scene partner, but they're neglecting all of these other environmental factors that can make their audition really rich, especially in the horror genre. So do not neglect those stage directions. Do not neglect those in between lines. They're chock full of information just as much as the dialogue.
I love that. Makes me want to go audition for something. I won't, but thank you guys so much. Those are great answers. There's such good stuff that we've talked about, and I know we're nearing our time, the end of our time together, but I know people are going to want to probably follow you guys along, see where your journey goes, so we can check you guys out and your work. So we're going to drop your handles in the chat, but where can viewers find or follow your work? So this is your chance. Proudly plug away.
That is a good question. I should be better about like cultivating a central spot for my work, but as a director, I'm a little bit newer in my career, which is very exciting. But I tend to post a lot of like what I'm doing, if there's film festival announcements or even behind the scenes, which I think is really, I love if I can be able to see like as the process is happening from my fellow sort of director colleagues, like what's going on. And I do a lot of that on Instagram. And my Insta handle is at JazzFaceKilla with an A, JazzFaceKilla. And yeah, I'll post stories if I'm somewhere, if I'm at a screening or if I'm shooting something new and I have some cool BTS or something fun that I've done. But a lot of updates will happen there. And then I do have a website, which is a triplejthing.com, that as I continue to add more work to my resume will get updated. But for Inner Demons, we do have a Instagram account as well, Inner Demons the film, and a website where you can check out some stuff and what's happening there as well. So Instagram for the most part, and then hit up our websites.
Yay, sweet, sweet. What about you two?
For me, I keep it simple. I'm on Instagram at Ari_Elizabeth26. I put all my music, my acting stuff, post fun stories. It's on my Instagram. And then you'll see me pop up on TV randomly. So, yeah.
Zachary, from the casting perspective, where can we see what you do? Do you post on social?
I do, and I'm actually public.
Ooh.
Yes. So I know that the shift already posted to the chat, but it's at Zachary, ZACHARY_Spiegs, SPIEGZ. And then in terms of following developments for the sequence, because I'm very, very excited about it, you can also follow the sequence_film. I'm super proud of that cast. Our lead has done many a Mike Flanagan project. Her name is Katie Parker. We love her. And the rest of the cast is just as fabulous as well. And we can't wait to see what happens after submitting it to festivals. And of course, are hoping for a future adaptation. So we think that that is in the pipeline as well. So we're very, very excited about it. And, you know, I am in this business to cultivate relationships with people that I believe in. And so the sequence is one thing, and I'm very, very excited about the other projects that follow with that team too.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, you guys. Seriously, I can't thank you enough for being here. I've learned so much, honestly, from this, and it's all so interesting. And thank you so much for all of the positive you are contributing to the space. So Zachary, Ariel, Jasmine, and Colton, who's came from us from afar, thank you so much. And to all of you in the audience, stay tuned for the Shift's next event announcement. And if you're a creator, filmmaker, or story executive, you can reach out to The Shift if you have a mental health movie in the making, or if you're tackling sensitive subject matter in your stories and you want to start a conversation about story consulting. So you can email The Shift, and we'll drop the email address in the chat now. So that's it for this panel. Thanks you guys again. And until next time, keep shifting. We wish you all the best, and with not only these projects, but all of your future projects. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.